Joining me now live in our Lagos studio to discuss this and much more, I have Adeola Ojo, an economist. Thank you very much for joining us on the Breakfast Show this morning.
Good morning.
We've seen increase in debt stock levels. The fiscal deficit has continued to grow. And that's not one of the best reports we are having at this point in time. And simultaneously, we've also seen reactions from the IMF and World Bank. So many reports within the first quarter and even this month, raising cautions how much we're spending on subsidy, how much the economic impact of this rising deficit is going to cost Nigeria in the short, medium, and long term. But the body language of government still sees our debt to GDP ratio and issues around borrowing at a reasonable level. There is no cause for alarm. There is no red flag as the international community is trying to paint. How do we marry these two realities, really?
I will start with the idea that the issue of whether there is a red flag or not, there is a red flag, and the federal government of Nigeria is actually painting this matter or treating it with a kid's glove in such a way that they do not want to let us know what is actually going on under the carpet. Maybe by the end of this tenure, by the time we actually try to look at what this government have put their hands into, we actually look at the humongous debt that they have tried to pile up for this economy. To be candid, I think what the IMF said actually was correct, because trying to look at the public debt as it is, which they put at 39 point something billion, and the amount that we also have from the Central Bank of Nigeria, which they also pile up about 14 something point something trillion. By the time we look at it, we look at it sometimes back. By the time we compare and look at it, we actually found out that they have spent more than 50 something trillion, and they are going towards 70 trillion even by the end of this year. Already we've seen it with what they expended last year, by the time, because they actually generated about 6 trillion extra fiscal deficits last year against what we have the previous year. So basically, from what I'm seeing, this government, the way things are going, they are not telling us the truth.
What do you make
we are going to a precipice.
What do you make of the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, that's Zainab Ahmed's blame on the country's rising fiscal deficit, partly to the ongoing Russian-Ukraine crisis? Now, this has definitely forced oil prices to go up. There's been a rally, and we still remain a major importer of the product. Talking about petrol.
I would like to say this, maybe before you actually add that, I would like to say this. Blaming the current imbroglio on what is happening in Ukraine and Russia is not yes, it may be a cause as of now, but that was not the cause, because last year, even towards the last quarter of last year, they spent an extra 1.3 trillion.
Subsidy.
So there was where did that work? Was there Ukraine-Russia challenge last year? They have the penchant of spending, so they shouldn't blame any issue of spending on Russia. Whatever, there have been a little increase, and we could see what happened in February and March when there was first scarcity across the country because of supply challenges. So will you now say, is it because there was no supply even at that period in time? So where was the subsidy? Because there was no supply, they didn't come in. And if at all there's going to be any level of supply now, that one came in towards the end of March when supply were restored into the country. And how much was that? So it is not the reason. The penchant for spending of this government is what is making them to continue to spend. You could see what the IMF said in January. At the central bank, they've taken about 14.2 trillion, and by February, just a month, they've taken an extra 700 billion. Where did that one go into? So they have a penchant for taking money, and that is the reason. That's what we are trying to address. Just take money and take and spend.
Your description of the government's borrowing pattern as a penchant just to have monies accumulated, well, that remains your opinion. Government will still stand by all of its efforts towards infrastructure development and a whole lot more, and say, well, this is what we are using it for. Hence, this is why we always say we have to follow the money. How do we also begin to have transparency? How do we begin to reduce the trust deficits that we have widening as we speak today? Now, in terms of all of these amounts being budgeted and the current budget that we have for this year, 2022, to what extent now would you want to see pen to paper how much you've spent on what clearly stated? Because the country has always had this issue of the noise of corruption, especially when we are trying to follow the money. We've never had clarity. So in terms of this public debt now, there's this air of exploitative tendency hovering around it.
Let me just say this. The issue of having to follow the money, I think this is very late now to follow the money. Because as of now, by next month, after the election or the primary election, you will not be able to follow anything any longer, because some of them will not even be there any longer for you to do anything. So, so let me just say it this way, generally, sir, that the way things are going, the issue of accountability or transparency for the remaining part of this year, let us just say, from my own point of view, let us say it's a bygone.
This is a heavy political season as
yes,
well, preceding next year's election.
Yeah.
It's ordinary ought to be a clean new slate for whatever government is coming into bear, but we have to face the reality. Any new government will still have to deal with the backlog of how much has been taken in terms of debt. Do you think,
like Jonathan government to Buhari, because they still made reference to that? Yeah.
Do you think we can get to a point where we begin to slim our cost of expenditure? Yes,
that is actually the thing that we are asking for every time. Like I said initially, all these things actually is a thing for us. That's why we have government in place. That's why we have all the checks and balances in place.
We are discussing the state of the Nigerian economy through the lens of the IMF, the World Bank, and then government stance on the state of the economy, from our borrowing to fiscal deficit and how much the nation needs to run afloat. I have with me in our Lagos studio Adeola Ojo. Thank you very much for still staying with us. Now we're wrapping up the conversation with your line of thought, especially towards reducing the size of the government expenditure at this point in time. Do you think we have any chance at all?
For this year, no. In this government, no. But it is possible in the next dispensation, because what we only need to do is put the.
But the antecedents have shown we've not reduced the size of our budget over the last decade.
No, that's why I said, sir, that for this government, no. For this dispensation, no. But in the coming dispensation, depending on who comes in the next government, then we may actually have such, because I have learned in the structure of things in the country that the head determines sometimes to a large extent what goes on in and that is one of the challenges of the economy. We actually work with the head. The Nigerian system, we work with the head, and that is what happens to the body. Whereas we should work with the structure, an effective structure that way whosoever comes in that can control it. But that is the problem we have in Nigeria. We don't have that structure. We now work with the head. So it depends on the person that comes in. If the person is frugal, if the person is shrewd, and if the person is wise, then it depends on what comes into the economy.
Well, it's still a heavy political season. We hope that in the next dispensation we get to make better choices. And we also have teams like the Economic Advisory Council also do a little more in terms of their counsel and ensuring that we have the economic affairs steered in the right direction. Thank you once again for your time on the Breakfast Show this morning. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, Adeola Ojo.
I appreciate it, sir.